Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Christina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Christina Schmidt. And today we're welcoming back on the podcast Jenny Barkan and Melanie Taylor for our Power Squad episode. So welcome, Jenny and Melanie. How are you today?
Good, very good. Fantastic weather. Canada Day mood. Everything
yes,
is
good.
So yeah, all good here. Thank
awesome.
you for having us.
Oh, good. Melanie, how are you doing?
Excellent. Yeah, feeling good after a long weekend.
Yeah. So for those of you, we're recording this the day after Canada Day. So we're all coming down off the holidays, long weekend. Kids just got done with school here in Canada. So first day home. So we may have some little ones wandering in, at least from my house. But welcome. So today I want to talk about, and it's going to be a little bit of a conversation of discovery for the three of us, but I want to talk about expectations. In our programs, we teach and we get people to experience what it's like to be setting expectations, because having clear expectations and making sure they're discussed and talked about so that both parties are meeting these expectations, those are critical things for building stronger relationships, building trust, and making sure everyone in your team is meeting expectations. But there's sometimes an opposite side of it. I was listening to a podcast recently, and the statement on there is that expectations can be the killer of joy. And it just got me thinking, if there's such a critical part, but yet I can see where they can be a killer of joy. So as an example, so many times they'll come into a marriage and they think that a marriage is going to be sunsets and roses and beautiful romantic dates all the time. But yet then they find themselves arguing over finances, cleaning up puke, and, all those lovely things that happen when you're in a marriage and going through 30, 40, 50 years of life together. And if they look at it and they say, this is what I expected and am so not meeting the expectation, it can be a killer of joy. So when we take it all back to the world of work, is there a caveat around expectations? Is there something we should be putting around there that we should better understand so we're not setting what might be an unrealistic expectation or a completely unmeetable expectation or fantasy of some form? So thoughts on that initially?
An example you gave about the marriage, thinking that it's all like going to be roses and unicorns, and then its reality hits. I don't think it's about expectations. It's about basic knowledge, right? So if someone is thinking that the marriage is just like dates and fantastic dinners, they have no idea what marriage is. It's not about too much expectations or too little. They just don't know what is it. So expectations, it's the next step. After you get enough information about whatever it is, then you set up yourself where in the scale you can be. Here, basic ones or more advanced ones. So we need to, I think, separate between the basic knowledge and information and the expectations based on that.
Okay, so like a little bit of ounce of reality has to be taken in. It can't be wishes.
Before you build, before you build any expectations.
And I think that comes into play with work level expectations, so team expectations as well. I know back when I was a leader, corporate would bring us down and say, put these behavioral expectations in place. And we're like, we're going to action everything. And we're going to, we would set these things that were so far from our reality because that's what we felt we should be doing. So maybe there's a should. Maybe we're shoulding all over ourselves, as they like to say. Should can be a bad word, I think, maybe in expectations. So that ounce of reality, or where we are today, has to come into play. So that's a good clarifier. Melanie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to realistic expectations. And again, we always use this word, and it like it has one definition or one thing, but there's so much nuance or sort of gray in that. And I often find myself thinking about actually setting low expectations, right? Like place the bar low, but that doesn't mean all my expectations are low, right? So I think for me, it's about having different levels of expectation and knowing what parts are important, or knowing where it's important to have high expectations that are like, that's the expectation and it has to be met, knowing where you can have low expectations and knowing where you can sort of set higher expectations, but you're working towards them. So like when you go into marriage, for example, having some realistic expectations around what's going to happen as far as life getting in the way, kids, let's say, or those kind of things. So maybe you set the bar low on some of that, or have more realistic expectations, but that doesn't mean for everything, right? In marriage, you have to have some areas where you set the expectations high. So again, I think it's getting a much stronger understanding of what those expectations should be, and not just using that word as kind of a blanket word.
Yeah. So I love that. I love the saying that, yes, you have different levels. So some people you set really high, or some situations you set something really high, and other situations, you've got to set it low. But what's that filter factor? Like what creates that filter for us?
I worked once with the client, and we were working on streaming the hiring process.
Okay.
So, and setting up expectations, what are they looking for in people that coming for interviews? So we came up with 3 levels. One is absolute must have, that without that, you're not even talking to the person. And then it was nice to have. It's all kind of additions to that. And then cherry on top.
Okay.
So we even drew a little cherry so it looks fun. So, and I think that's the expectation. So taking the same marriage, right? So for example, listening to each other and do not swear at each other would be the must. That's the bare minimum, right? For someone. And then nice to have, it's like a romantic dinner once in a while, or time together, or a common hobby, or whose mom we're visiting first, right? So all those kind of things that making it even better. Okay. And then there's a cherry on top that we would love to thrive to that if the life allows us, but we can live without it. So I think it can be used in any expectations, right? Not just for hiring someone.
No, that I like that. I love the must-haves, nice-to-haves, and cherries on top. Very, very visible. It kind of reminds me of Patrick Lencioni's core values definitions, like where your core values are maybe it's a little different, but core values are the must-have. But then there's the pay to play, which is, so maybe, I don't know, unless core values are your cherries on top, but that doesn't seem right. That seems aspirational values, things you want to get to. So Patrick Lencioni's are the core values, the pay to play values, the accidental values, and the aspirational values. And so kind of putting all those 4 pieces together. I think it's different than what you're saying, though. Just in that core would be the ones you must have. You want to embody those. If you're hiring somebody, for example, you would want to have that. And the pay to plays are just that's just bare minimum expectations, maybe. So I don't know if it fits in, but it kind of reminded me of that.
Different, right? Yeah. But it's still tiers, right? So it's a base that without this, we're not hiring, we're not getting married, we're not like, we do like, that's the minimum. And then there's the things that we really, really want to make it a great experience.
Yes.
And then there's always aspirations. I love this word, right? So we should, like, should it, we said it's not a good word. We allowed to shoot to the stars, right? Why not? And dream big and everything. But with understanding that if it's not happening, what we still have is good, is solid.
We can work with it.
If it makes sense. Yeah.
Thoughts around that one?
What do you think?
Well, I keep coming back to the interconnectedness of everything that we end up doing and talking about, because although we're talking about expectations, you're going back to what you were saying, Christina, like, how do we determine what are the aspirational versus the realistic, et cetera, right? Because I mean, we can say, yeah, there's 3 tiers, but how do you know what goes in those 3 tiers? Because you can say, well, no, cherry on top isn't kids never having issues, etc., that I have to deal with. That's the realistic, that's going to happen. So I think, again, that interconnectedness of it, to me, it comes back to spending time thinking about this stuff, getting out of your own bubble, and listening. Because and why I say that, it's so easy to, let's say, a whole bunch of people who've never had kids sit around talking to each other about expectations, like, oh, I expect this, or I expect that, I expect this. You're in your bubble of expectations, talking about things and setting these high expectations that are completely unrealistic because you don't have perspective, input, etc. And then we show up being disappointed. And again, I think we do that. I mean, you get a group of CEOs together, or 8 people in HR together, or people on the front lines together in their bubble, and they create this sort of groupthink expectation and come in like, this is it, this is what we expect, with no understanding of the system that you're fully operating, or the outcomes, or the realities of that, and what those expectations, what needs to give and take for that. So again, getting out of our own personal bubble, getting out of the bubble that we're in, this sort of that groupthink mentality potentially, and then like listening. I think, again, not talking, like spending time listening to others to understand, what should my realistic expectation be? Like, am I asking too much? If I want that, what else do I need to give or take or understand, right? So like, again, all of this connects back to communication. And I think that's why our expectations are often unrealistic, is because they're made in a vacuum. That is sometimes our own vacuum, but then we seek out like ideas and thoughts online or in groups, etc., that just validate our own unrealistic expectations. So I think we need to expand our minds, expand our everything, if we actually want to be able to do these.
Yeah, that's good. So if we were to give like a practical way for leaders to do that, what would that look like? Bringing people in, listening, what would that look like? How deep do we go? How far do we go? Any thoughts?
Well, what's my expectation?
I mean, like, so many leaders will do like an anonymous survey, and they'll like put something out there. Is that enough? Is that maybe a step 1? Or do we need to bring like small round table, small groups in and like survey the whole organization, and really like town hall meetings, or like what do you guys think?
I always look at a survey as, maybe creating the survey is step 1, but the survey itself is definitely step 1. It's not the end. It is, to me, the start. But I think it comes back to the mindset piece. Where you start is your mindset. Like, you have to be, in order for the survey to work well, in order for the discussions to work well, in order for like to be able to change your perspective or get a understanding of what realistic is, your mindset has to be that you're open to other ideas, other thoughts, other people's way of thinking and being. You have to fundamentally respect people and people's opinions. It's something I've been coming up either alongside or against so often. So, I mean, where do people in sort of the most senior decision making roles have to start? Often right here. That's the biggest barrier. Like, I'm going to say, like, how do we get people to see this stuff? They're not going to see it until they see it, right? And so but how do you crack someone else's mind? You can't. They have to do it themselves first.
Yeah. That being ready, or you have to like have some level of humility in order to learn anything, really, like before you can say, like, you have to come down from I'm an expert and I don't need help a little bit before you're going to grow. So good. All right. So it's mindset. So getting your mindset right, being open to some change. Survey could be a start, but a start of a conversation, not the end all be all of the information. And so, yeah. So good. Awesome. So some practical things. Maybe. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
I always like to look at it too as like sort of a question of, is this expectation working for me? Like, the expectation the kids are going to come into.
I had a very realistic expectation that it might happen. So I'm going to pause this for 1 second. Give me 1 second. You pause the recording. Yes, baby.
Can we refund one of my fans?
No, is it 3:00? It's not 3:00, so nope.
This is an excellent example of where your expectations, like, it's a really high expectation that you're not going to get interrupted at this moment. All that happens is you end up with stress, frustration, like all of these feelings that prevent us from doing anything effective. Whereas if you set the bar low, the high bar, this is going to be an excellent conversation, podcast, etc. But as far as interruptions, I'm setting the bar low, right? So there's different.
Yes.
So great podcast, interruption bar really low. And so these don't have to be like interconnected, right? Like they're interconnected, but they're not one and the same. Like, you don't have to have no interruptions to have a great podcast. And then you respond based on your expectations. So a kid shows up, we already set the expectation from the beginning that the kid is probably going to show up. And so it happened, and you make the most of it, right?
Exactly.
So, and again, so much of it's about feelings and the reframing that happens in our head. Like, so many times we're creating this stress that just doesn't need to be there.
Yes.
And again, there's lots of places where we want to have high expectations, like, and etc. But something like this, we're creating stress for no reason. And I think, again, in talking to leaders and team members, etc., we create so many stressors where there don't need to be stressors based on our expectations. And so being open to that, talking about it, having the conversations that we're not having in organizations. Like, we're spending so much time doing the work that we're not actually doing the work of having the conversations, exploring the expectations, what's reasonable, how do we aspire here, but then pick away slowly so that we're not as stressed and frustrated. Again, this is all pieces of this whole thing.
Yeah. I love Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just saying that listening to you guys, you said it would be discovery, right? So some thoughts pop up to me, and I was listening to you, and we use this high expectations and low expectations many times. And I understand that sometimes we, like, when we say high expectations, oh, that's good. Low expectations, oh, that's not very good. Which I think it's a little bit misleading. So, for example, high expectation of great podcast and low expectations for children do not pop up, right? But it's both just expectations. They're not high, not low. So I'm expecting the podcast to go well because I know what I'm doing and invited people who know what they're doing. So that's we expect to respect each other and be nice and share. And I have another expectation that my child probably will come in during the podcast and that it is what it is because school is over. Or, for example, at work, so high expectation, it's what everybody coming to work on time, right? And low expectation that half of the time people coming on time. No, we have expectation for people to come in when they're supposed to come in, with understanding that some of them will come late or early because something happens. So if we would treat expectations as horizontal, not high or low, just expectation, I think it takes away this heavy like load on the shoulders that we have to have at least some high expectations, and some of them are low. But if we say they all kind of equal, like somewhere horizontal, then it makes it a little easier on the mind, I think, and on the expectations to be at the high level all the time, right? Because there's no levels. It just, that is expected and that is not. What do you think about that? It just came to my mind.
No, when you were saying it, it was kind of popping into my mind because I like the idea of not using those words high and low, because high expectations, they make you think that this person is deserving of more in some way, and low expectations, it almost makes you feel like you think less of that person. But when you were saying it, it kind of makes me think about like, okay, how much control does one have over that behavior? So as adults who are trained in these leadership things, and we've done a handful of podcasts together, we have control over presenting ourselves well, presenting our ideas, speaking clearly, that sort of thing. A 5-year-old, on the other hand, with an underdeveloped, what's the word, Jenny? Abdullah?
Prefrontal cortex?
Yeah, that one, yeah. With a very low development there, doesn't have as much ability to control himself to meet the expectation that we set, which was stay out here while mommy's in here. We're understanding of that and empathetic of the fact that, you know, it's a long time. This is the second call I've been on that he's been around for. And so we're getting the empathetic understanding that he's going to do the best he can. And actually, I was quite happy with the way the conversation went, because we had set, today's the first official day of summer. So we went through and we did a schedule up together, and we decided iPad time is at 3:00. And so I was able to bring him back to the expectation that he agreed to, and we set, and I said, is it 3:00? And then he needed more information because he said, how long is that? And so I was able to give him more information once I listened. I wasn't listening at first, but once I started listening, I was able to say, that's in 1 hour. And he says, 1 more hour? And I said, yeah, just 1 more hour. And he said, okay. And then he left. I was like, wow. But there was the listening, the having preset it in advance of the time, but then just giving a moment and showing the little bit of empathy. Like, I know it's hard. I know it's hard for you to do this. What do you need to understand what that expectation is? So day one, I was able to kind of bring him back. So I'm happy. He met my expectations.
And wasn't like that it was low expectation. You were expecting very less of him. You were expected what you set up, right? So you set up that he might come. He came, you talked, and you keep going. Mm-hmm. So, and you don't think, oh, I had very low expectation of my child. Maybe it's not fair, right, etc. It's not a high low. It's just an expectation.
Exactly.
It's a realistic expectation based on understanding development, like factors, all of that kind of stuff. And it comes back to, you talked about like kids and the expectations of kids. One thing I hear so often is, well, they're adults. They should insert whatever. And my response is usually, have you met adults? Like, why do you set the bar here for adults when, like, come on, we aren't good at this, we're not perfect. If you were perfect, you wouldn't have any of these problems because you would have figured it all out. So like, none of us are perfect. And so I think we put too much of an unrealistic expectation on adults, adult behavior, adult feelings, adult thoughts. And so if you come back to, where should a CEO or whoever start learning about people I think so often, like we learn the technical stuff, right? Like we go through, we learn all the technical stuff, we learn all of these things, we learn all these processes, we learn these tips, we learn these tools, and then we set these unrealistic expectations because we need to set the expectation around the person and people in general often. And we don't, it becomes clear that we don't understand people enough to be able to set realistic expectations that don't end up leaving us disappointed, stressed, angry, frustrated, etc. Right? It doesn't mean that you can't have an expectation over time of where that person is going to get to. But again, like I always come back to, do you want to be right or do you want different outcomes? Because you can be right and say, well, I should be able to expect that of them. Cool. And that's not where they're at. So you can aspire to that expectation, but also need to be realistic of where you're at and what expectations you can have in the moment. Right? So it doesn't mean, Christina, your child isn't going to eventually not interrupt you, maybe sooner than other children his age. But now you manage your expectations where he's at with the aspiration that that's where you get to, right? And again, you need to understand people, your child in general, yourself, etc. And that's where people, I think, need to start, in my observation and opinion.
I think it's quite educated opinion there, Melanie. All right.
I think often leaders, they finding it's hard because Melanie, absolutely right, that someone can meet expectations quite quickly and raise the bar, and someone needs additional help or time or whatever. And so for leaders, they kind of have to have a set of expectations for every person they lead. And it seems to be very chaotic, right? There's no order. There's no like one size fits all. We always want this simple solution, right? That will fix all the problems. And that's the expectation that will never be met, right? Because people are different. So some expectations we actually have to let go completely, right? In order to, as Melanie mentioned, to learn the people. And if I know the person well enough, I can adjust my expectations personally, and it won't look like, oh my God, it's so much work. It would be much more natural because I know the person. I spend time and effort getting to know. Then the expectations adjustment will follow almost effortlessly, basically.
Yeah, I think linked to that too. Sorry, not to cut you off. But linked to that too, I think that leaders need to have an expectation that leading takes time. I feel like there are so many times when, you get somebody who's a team member, then they say, you're going to be the leader of that team. You're still going to do all your stuff, and you're going to handle the more advanced stuff too and lead the people. And it's like, so when do you lead? Like that expectation that leading is a whole portion of your job. And if leader or manager or something like that is attached to your title, there should be an expectation that some percentage, 50%, 75% of your time is spent. I don't know what that number is, but there should be a percentage of time allocated to leading. So having these sorts of discussions, thinking through it, spending the one-on-one time, spending the time, chatting with people, getting to know, giving them feedback, all that sort of stuff. Like all of that is so critical. And I see so many times that leaders forget to allocate time for leading. Or if they do, it's very minimal, or it's if I have time, I have to do all these other things. And if I have time at the end of the day, I'll take care of that stuff. And it's so upside down as far as that expectation. And so if we could flip that idea on its head a little bit, that may benefit a whole lot of teams out there.
I think that comes back to a lack of understanding people, including mostly yourself, right? Yeah. So like when we don't understand people, we don't understand what they need to be motivated, to do their best, to be able to succeed, etc. And we just think, well, as long as you're a good employee, I won't have to manage you, right? You'll just do it yourself. Again, that's wholly missing the understanding of people and what even more we can help people achieve and what more we can help people feel, etc. So if you understand that, all of a sudden putting your 90% of your time towards leading people, like actually helping them become motivated, coaching them through things, dealing with these issues, etc., makes sense. You're like, oh, why wouldn't I spend all of that time? But when we're not doing this because we don't understand people. And then again, a big piece of it is understanding ourselves. Why are we so resistant to that? Well, if I don't understand it and I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm really comfortable with this technical piece of my job, I can fill my entire day to that technical job and be like, oh, no, I don't have time for that because I have to work on this thing that I'm comfortable with and understand, etc. And again, we don't understand people, so we do that, right? And so again, it comes back to understanding how we tick, why we're motivated, why we resist something, why we prioritize something. That is ultimately what's going to help you set and meet realistic expectations.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to start winding us down here because I think we've had some great conversation. We've given some people some practical things they can take away, they can put in place, practical things they can keep thinking about to change their mindset as well. And a very practical example, right in your unplanned practical example of expectations. So I want to thank both of you for coming on once again and sharing this fantastic conversation and these thoughts, because just getting people talking about it, getting people thinking about it, I think will change the culture, change our mindsets around what leading is, why we want to have expectations, and how we can use them. So thank you so much. And join us again next time on the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thank you for listening to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about all things people and organizational wellness, because quality people and processes are at the heart of every successful business. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when new episodes are released. You can also follow me on Instagram at christinaschmidt.ca, where I share real-life tips to help in your leadership and life journey. To get one-on-one and team support with your leadership development, book a discovery call on my website at christinaschmidt.ca. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.